It's always thrilling to get a PhD student whom, when you look at, you realize, oh, he is a better PhD student than what I used to.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
he
Good answer.
delivers little different. So he surpasses you. So
Mm.
there are a lot of very interesting moments. Like I did the clay mineralogy of the Brahmaputra sediment, and I realized, including some of the a few past authors, that there are very little montmorillonite or smectite into the clay mineralogy of Brahmaputra sediment. And then when even after so many years, my PhD student come up and shows me the result, and he shows the same trend, you feel that, okay, I'm indicated that we did the right thing even at that point of time when maybe the advancement of equipment, etc., were not so good. And the other thing is that, as you do a lot of diagnostic study in the, say, medical science and imaging and all that, and then they said that this needs to be clinically correlated. So I think that clinical correlation in research is very, very interesting. So we do scanning electron microscopy. We do all range of kind of imaging to other analytical thing. And finally, when there is a interesting agreement between all, and you converge into a kind of a conclusion, that becomes very interesting. And I would also add here the scale part of it. Sometimes you do certain analytical engagement in a very, very micro level, and then you are also having a very macro picture today with remote sensing and other tools. Like right now, we are looking at the glaciers in the eastern Himalayas, and we found that by these RCP scenarios, by 2100, some of the glaciers are showing kind of 99% depletion. Basically, they are going to vanish. Now you start worrying that, is it really so? Because these are like very profound kind of finding, and you also depend on extending some of the existing model and then build your model on that. So you go back and start looking at the premises on which these models are built, whether you are building a tall building on a weak foundation, that your projections can go wrong, and then you, as a scientist, you actually fail. So there comes the role of my multiple students. So I divide some of this work into different people, and they come together with their own finding. We sit together and see that how it is making sense. So this is something I think fascinating, that you look at maybe sometime a whole of a problem and divide into couple of very critical aspects and give it to different people to go more deeper into it, come back and see that finally also the whole is making a sense. I am not say that this is the entire thing I would like to tell you, but I just have given you an example
Yeah.
how, as a supervisor, you
Hmm.
feel very happy about that. Okay, maybe this set of or subset of problems I devise for my individual students eventually makes sense, because they are seeing each other in terms of the correlation of their work, and eventually they become part of a whole solution. Even if you have sour moments also, when you go ahead in time and look back, everything looks sweet. No sour memories remain, even because they are all learning lessons. Even if you have a difficult time, a bad experience, sometime, yes, one or two experience can leave a very long imprint in your mind, that this should not have happened. Something very tragic, something of a maybe a big betrayal, or something that you really lost faith in humanity kind of a experience. But other than that, if you look at, for example, a bad argument with your supervisor, or he pulling you up for maybe not being steadfast in your work, at that moment perhaps you had lot of pain. But when you go ahead in life and look back and play the role of your supervisor by that time, you realize that all memories become very, very good memories. There is nothing in terms of being complaining about or regretting about, because then everything start falling in place. You start realizing that unless that would have happened, I would not have been like this. After doing a PhD, becoming a PhD supervisor itself to lead a group of students, I think nothing could be a better career than that. Being a teacher or a professor yourself is one of the greatest thing that can happen as a career. partly because you have a opportunity to continue your seeking knowledge exercise, or rather, many of them, a PhD is not the end of everything. You are actually, by the time you submit your PhD, you're left with more future scope of work than what you have done. So when you become a professor, you have a second chance to attend all those future scope of work in a manner. And also, you start reflecting that every time you become a teacher, you remember, okay, my ex teacher used to do like this, my Y teacher used to do like that. So, or somewhere you feel that I felt a little annoyed by this particular teacher because of this particular trait, and probably I should not land up doing that to my own students. So, you become a more refined human being also. It's like almost like parenting, that you have gone through your childhood and growing up with your parents, then you become a parent and you have your children. I think for a professor it is almost a similar kind of a experience, that you groom a set of new younger generation, which you kind of feel that, okay, I'll not make them make the same mistake that I did. So you always give better of yourself. You always do better of yourself, and also many of the things that you could not find answer to, you have a second chance to ask your students to go pursuing that, and he may come back with, probably, as I said, a more exciting outcome than even what you would have anticipated. So the rewards of being a professor is, I think, unmeasurable. I mean, immeasurable, because uh, nothing could have been a better career than maybe a professor or a teacher. And I keep realizing it again and again at many levels, that today, if I happen to go anywhere in the world, particularly being in an IIT, I just have to kind of announce it to one or two of my students around that area, whether it's California or Japan, you know better, or anywhere,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
you have a score of people readily kind of waiting for you to take you
Yeah,
around and
yeah, yeah.
receive you and come back and
So,
meet and catching up with their children. I mean, everything is a challenge. So I would say that one is that, maintaining your continued credibility as a teacher, as a guide, also as an administrator, whatever given. Basically, having your self-esteem, your recognition, your credibility in place. I think that's a big challenge all the time. That you should be respected, so maintaining your respect is, I think, one of the biggest challenge continuously, not only now, maybe in the past, maybe in the future. That whenever people take your name or remember you, it should be with a lot of reverence and respect. That you stand for whatever you are, truthfully, and in terms of your conduct as a teacher, as a respected human being. And that's kind of a wholesome thing, I must say. Other than that, the other challenges, I mean, there could be a whole list of it, but you said three. One is also, keeping pace with as things are unfolding scientifically, technically, not disappointing your students, that you are always update, and they find that you are always giving them the most current kind of advice for the best of it, be it a typical class or be it your PhD or MTech student, that you are always update, and you are always well informed, and you are always guiding them rightly. Also sort of taking a whole care that they feel very secure, that as long as I am with my professor, I'm taken care of in all possible ways, including probably finding a right career for me. And of course, thirdly, I would say definitely the personal well-being, health-wise, both physical and mental, so that you are fit and you can deliver, you can inspire both your family, your student, the community at large, your neighborhood, the government who comes to you for help and solutions. So these are the things. I think it is all about living up to a sort of a expectation not never going below a benchmark, always rather spiraling into the next level, growing yourself, and doing better each time in terms of your given responsibility. Basically, uh, I should never fail you, or I should never fail anyone who has an expectation out of me. And along with age, other realization comes that sort of however much you try, you perhaps cannot change the world. You have limitations, so you have to let go somewhere and you have to accept as things are. Sometimes that also becomes very difficult because at a younger age you feel that actually you can change the world, but then slowly you realize that certain things are simply to be accepted, and you should be happy with whatever you could achieve with your best possible efforts. So those are also in a way challenges as it comes along with time. Besides seeing your students and your own children being placed in their own way, but not having too much of expectation also. But I would still maintain that most importantly, one should not fail anyone. I should not fail my son as a father. I should not fail my student as a teacher. I should not fail my country as a citizen. I should not fail my profession as a professional. So, if you can do that, eventually, I would say life could be pretty simple. You should not really complicate things too much, and it should be easygoing life. That's, I think, at some point of time, more and more you start realizing, and it gives you a sort of a way of living life, little in a more peaceful and in a acceptable manner. This is, as you know, is a question facing us all the time: how to become a better teacher each day. Today, people talk about flipped classroom, about so many other models of classroom teaching. As you know, right now, due to pandemic, we are doing an online teaching, and we're trying to make it effective. I would say I may not be the most correct person saying that, but uh, the most important part of teaching is to connect. As soon as you connect to your student, that I am together with you in this knowledge seeking exercise, and you build that rapport. He has a trust in you that you mean good to him in terms of making him a more knowledgeable person. Your half the battle is won. And then, many times you need not really teach in true sense. It is, as we all know today, it's like a joint learning. Let's seek this out. Let's learn this out. What do you feel about it? So every step there is a question and there is a try. There's an effort to resolve answer, which you tell your student, are you agreeable to this answer? Is this the way we should think about this particular knowledge, or do you have anything more? Because today's teaching, I think one need to recognize, and this keeps happening in the class. People sit with their smartphone also. So when you are perhaps mentioning, except for fundamentals and some of the classical stuff, you say something and your student messes are probably you need an update. That figure has changed to this. So he's more updated than you because he's into that subject and he's constantly following it, which is good. I think most important is in terms of teaching is to excite and motivate your students to seek out things to learn. So if you can motivate them to learn and if you can guide them where they will find what they are looking for, your teaching purpose is almost kind of resolved. I mean, more than ever today, I think it is very important to maintain a network, and that network could be at different level. A network along with your, peer group is important, along with your student network is important, and also keep a track of, who are the leading people in your field doing what, instead of getting into a conflicting competition with them. If they become your partner, nothing like it, that okay, you are into this problem as well, and I have also a small group working, can we join hands and try to find solutions together and do research together. So network is very important. Well, today, because of I would say a career perspective, or this whole personal perspective, people do networking for so many different purposes. Sometimes some network land up becoming, you scratch my back, I scratch yours. I think it is also getting into that sort of a situation, which are at some point detrimental to science. That should not happen, but a respectable, mutual, beneficial network is most essential in terms of even, sending out your student to a particular lab to spend some time and learn from them and come back, bringing them over to your lab. Uh, all are part of it. Besides, um, uh, um, I'm sure there are a lot of advantages, because if you have a good network, your next publication lands up with a known network people, and it helps out. I'm not saying that he or she will be any biased about you, but even then, he knows that, okay, Dr. Kumar's group has come up with this new work. Let me, put some extra effort to do a good review of it, not a piecemeal review and send it back with a few cursory comments. So, as we all know, many times our publications become a very different quality just because the reviewers really uh, get painstaking time into, not only giving technical comments but also correcting, even the language. So sometime when reviewed manuscript come back with the kind of rigorous comments, you feel so grateful, and probably it is possible that he or she is one of your network people having a lot of affection and respect for you. So a network can have lot, positive benefits done the right way. Yes. The whole philosophical point is that a publication should happen because it needs to be published, because it's a good piece of work. People should know about it. It should take science one step further. Somebody should get, inspired by this work. That, oh, these people have already got this particular outcome, and I can build on that the next level and all that. So a publication should always be a deserving publication. Now, what has happened? The truth is that because it is added to or linked to our career progression, um, the publication itself often become an end in itself. So by hook or by crook, people just want to publish. Now, if you really have a good piece of original, primary work, and you have written it down properly with the necessary help from, colleagues and your supervisor, chances of rejection is actually very low. And also, if you have identified the target journal where actually your kind of work is generally accommodated, um, there are times where, I myself say that a student have brought in a good meticulous work. I gave a lot of time because it excites me and edit it properly, and then it goes and it just gets accepted without even a review. So that also happened. On the other hand, the work itself was a little patchy. The writing part was not so good professionally, and when it comes to me from a student, I also find it to be not so exciting for myself because of all the topsy-turviness. I don't do a good editing also with full my heart, and it comes back with a rejection. So both of these kind of thing can happen. Unfortunately, today, because of the number game, some of the groups have become almost like journal producing factories. There are certain formats, and people put things there, and it's just small piecemeal thing, and you expect that it should be published. I am aware of some of my international collaborators who sometimes take one whole year to write one journal paper out of a collaborative work we do. So that's very respected, because they often even don't want to put their name unless the journal has reached a certain quality. It's a ethical feeling that I would not like to assign my name into a paper where which have not passed to a certain degree of quality benchmark. But on the other hand, the extreme case oppositely, that left and right people are going for. So we know that journal publication for a young PhD scholar is a strategy. You have to think about that. What of my work will be publishable? how I put it across, what is that USP, at least some single USP has to be there. Then you have to do a lot of scouting about which journal is most likely to be appropriate for me. You do a bit of homework about the editors also, go to their website and see that what kind of work they engage into. So it's a whole lot of preparation. But most of the time, rejection or dissatisfaction or disappointment comes from the fact that without doing the required homework and the required rigority of the work, we, push a paper hoping that maybe it will somehow get through and get published, because I need a number. So these two extremes are now, playing its own role in the whole publication game. But I would say that after putting a best effort, getting a rejection is fine, and one can convince students because he himself will know, that if he looks at the comment, oh, they're not so bad. They're all about improving this manuscript to resubmit or to give it to another journal, and he can understand. So it's a mixed bag. Again, I must say, you also know very well, because of
Yeah.
so many pressures, we'll end up doing all this thing. Yeah. PhD application, well, you all know, we definitely look at the basic qualification, that how had been the academic track record. That's a kind of a qualifier, if you can call it. But more importantly, nowadays, we always ask for a SOP. So two things we look at. One, that a PhD student generally comes after a master's degree. So the master dissertation, again, with all the realization that a master dissertation is a master dissertation, a PhD is a PhD. We don't want somebody to really jump the queue. So whether his BTech report or MTech report, we look at that level, and has he kind of got into a knack of research. We all know masters, we do not really look for primary data, even secondary data is good enough. But if he has developed a good analytical methodology or an approach, that he has a kind of a scientific way of seeking answer to questions, that become an important criteria. And then definitely the statement of purpose, we see that has he picked up or has she picked up a little, odd novel problem than just the usual stuff. I must say that nowadays many applications are very disappointing, as I already maintained, because many students would like to stray into PhD, as a stopgap, and so they do not really put their heart into it. And there is a whole lot of problem of plagiarism and all that. But I guess we still have a way that at the time of cross questioning, one can really screen out the best PhD student. If you have a certain number of seats and you have a certain number of applicants, sometime one or two people get through just by chance, because they sort of show a promise. There are instances in the past we have found that we regret saying that, oh, we picked up a wrong person. He should not or she should not have been into the PhD. It becomes a problem. Rarely, though, generally our mechanism helps us to screen out. So this is the thing. I think basic qualification, then somewhere, a way of knowing that he or she is opting for this PhD with a lot of interest. It is not just kind of there's nothing else to do. So as of now in the pandemic, this is happening a lot. Our number of PhD applications has gone up kind of fivefold, tenfold, and it's a Herculean task. Some departments are doing a rapid fire to, eliminate as many candidates possible. We are not doing that. Like in my department, I think this round PhD, we had about 700 interviews, over 3, 4, 5 days. So, and then with different panels. So,
Hmm.
if you put that sort of a rigor and mechanism of, having them engage over a little longer period of time, I believe that you can really find out who is really suitable for a PhD for a particular topic. And for academic position, as you all know, we look for definitely good credential again, and then what he is currently doing, which laboratory, with whom he was working, and again possibly to a emerging field which is not being right now pursued by our department or the center wherever we are. We try to fill gaps. We don't try to bring people where already people are working upon. Except sometime, even in known areas also, there are people who are doing impeccably superior level of research. So that becomes a rider. And then, of course, that we do look at communication skill. So in our selection process, which is going to happen soon, we look for, one is a classroom situation delivery. So a chosen topic from a textbook is to be communicated, treating the audience as a class. Secondly, the highlight of a research right now happening. And thirdly, of course, a whole lot of cross question, particularly focusing on fundamentals and some of the classic stuff, which is essential to be delivered to early students. That is something not compromisable. Research area apart. We all have to perform duties. I have also performed duties as head, as dean, and all that. And I must tell you, these are all learning lessons. The governance is something that you learn on the job as well, and you become better for the next round of doing things. So I guess one is, of course, very important is to respect every team member of yours with due respect for their position, be it an attendant, be it your associate dean or whoever, and also being very very caring to be someone that they can fall back to in their distress, and also taking all responsibilities for their fault or for their shortcomings. Many people believe that an academician sometimes do not perform well or even fail as an administrator. But it's, I guess, about a lot about your basic philosophy of respecting your fellow human beings in their own merit, in their own right, and that touches people. That gives you a sort of a different support system. Your subordinates can actually die for you if they know that you can die for them. So it's a synergy. It's a kind of a very myriad kind of a connection and sort of a networking. Again, as you said, if you are an administrator within your office system with maybe one or two dozen of your staff, you need a very good network. And today's world, as you know, you are out of your office, but your WhatsApp, your social media is buzzing every time because your staff is alerting you, sir, something emergency has happened, this has happened, what is your advice, how do I handle? So I guess as an administrator, what I learned was, in fact, after I left my administrative position, the good part is that many of my junior colleagues have remained lifelong friends. So I realized that they love me, irrespective of my position, which is now gone. And that perhaps somewhere I feel is a huge satisfaction that it was not never about that just because I was their boss and they respected me. So that human connection at each level, I think, is very important.